Anyway, let me just make a quick introduction, and I want people to hear from you as soon as possible. I am so honored, first of all, to have the pleasure of your company, even if it is through this phone device. For those who don't know, I learned about the struggle of Chief Spookw and the Gitxsan, which is a First Nation up in British Columbia, Canada. I learned about this a few weeks ago when I read this bizarre story in a local newspaper that Chief Spookw had been arrested for blocking a rail line in his province that crossed the territory of the Gitxsan, of which he's a hereditary chief. He and others were arrested, and the Crown prosecutor, that is the regular prosecutor in British Columbia, by the way, correct me if any of this is wrong, but as I understand it, they refused to prosecute the chief, did not think the case was in the public interest. And then the judge actually gave authority to a private company, the Canadian National Railway Company, to prosecute the chief directly without going through the government. And this really caught my attention because it's the same exact thing that happened to me. A judge charged me with criminal contempt after I helped Indigenous peoples in the Amazon of Ecuador win a big pollution judgment against Chevron. The prosecutor refused to prosecute me. The judge appointed a private law firm from Chevron, the very company that we had won the judgment against, to prosecute me. And they put me in jail and kept me at home under detention now for almost 3 years. So Chief Spokow's case really captured my attention. And as I began to talk to the chief and Kai, who works closely with the chief and the Gitxsan, I really realized this is a powerful story. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Chief Spookw, to tell us a little bit about how this happened. I mean, how did a private prosecution, or the prospective one, come to be against you in Canada? And, you know, this is a U.S. audience, so most people I don't think are that familiar with the Gitxsan. So maybe you could just give us a little background and explain how it came to be in your current situation, and then we'll sort of go from there. I am not hearing the chief. Is anyone else not hearing the chief? Hold on. Xander? Xander's my assistant. I can't do anything without him. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, yes.
Okay, can Chief Spookw, can you hear me? Because I can't hear the chief. Xander, can you hear that? There's no sound coming from the chief. Kai?
I can hear him, and I can hear you on this end.
Okay, because I'm getting some people saying they can't hear the chief. Kai, can you speak? Kai, a lot of people can't hear Chief Spookw.
Okay.
Oh, there we go. We can hear you now. Go. You got it. Roll.
Okay. Okay. In 2020, after the Wet'suwet'en were facing their second invasion of their territory, as they were trying to block the CGL pipeline.
Just hold on, so people understand. The Wet'suwet'en are a First Nation that has territory next to the Gitxsan in British Columbia, right? Is that correct?
Yeah.
And
we were both involved with the Delaware court decision.
Exactly.
Gitxsan and Wet'suwet'en went into that.
Okay, and the immediate controversy, and I want to talk about that court decision in a second, but the immediate controversy, and the reason you were protesting is because a gas company is building a pipeline across this First Nations territories in British Columbia in a way that really can destroy the habitat and the rivers and the fish and the environment in a way that people there had relied on for centuries for their sustenance. So the protests are about stopping a huge gas pipeline, and maybe you could explain, get us sort of situated in the present, and then we'll go backwards. So where are things today after the protest? Are you facing prison? Is the company going to try to prosecute you? Where do you stand right now on that issue?
Well, on January 26th, CN had, after some public pressure from the media and such, they backed down from pressing the civil contempt charges, and they agreed not to pursue the private criminal prosecution. But since then, they've been trying to ignore our lawyers. Every couple of weeks, we have to send them an ultimatum to try to get them to commit to a court date just so they can go in and vacate those charges. But every week, it's been an issue.
So they, just to be clear, the Canadian National Railway, which is the private company that the judge said could prosecute you without going through the regular prosecutor, has agreed publicly not to prosecute you. But every time your lawyer tries to get them in court, so they actually sign the document and the charges go away, they just don't show up.
Well, it's not even a matter of getting into court. They're trying to avoid even booking a date.
So they're trying to leave the option open to basically go after you, even though they said they wouldn't. Is that sort of how you're reading it?
Well, I think they're trying to stretch this out as far as possible. Like prior to them issuing the letter saying they we're not going to pursue the charges, they had, we were facing the charges, so we were under those restrictions. We had signed some papers for when we were to be released from jail. Those restrictions are still in place. As soon as they vacate the charges, then those restrictions are gone. And they want to string it out and maintain the status quo as if we're still facing the charges.
So the restrictions, I would imagine, prevent you from engaging in acts of protest, that kind of stuff?
Well, they literally restrict us from actually walking on the tracks. Like if there's any issues with the tracks going through my territory, people call me and explain what is going on, and I literally go down and have a look and make sure this is whatever is going on, and then I would get in contact with CN and explain what is going on and ask them what the issue is, because they would have to fix it.
Mm-hmm.
They have a responsibility to consult with me on every issue. They don't generally do that, but that would be the goal.
And what is your position vis-a-vis the tracks that go through Gitxsan territory, that they shouldn't be there at all, or that the company should pay your people money for leasing the land? What is the posture, the position of your people vis-a-vis these rail tracks going across their territory?
Oh, it's been over 100 years of literally ignoring our rights and titles to the land. They're enabling Canada or helping Canada to continue the long, slow theft of our lands. We're not entirely different from what's going on in Ukraine right now, mm-hmm. because Russia is seeking to occupy Ukraine. They're doing it with force. The Canadian government has been doing this for 200 years, a long, slow process of land theft, literally attempting to steal all of our resources, everything. Like if they steal minerals that are being mined and whatever, once those are gone, they're gone. So
how many, for someone who's not that familiar with it, how many centuries or millennia have the Gitxsan lived on these lands?
Oh, the smallest estimate would be over 10,000 years.
Wow.
We've seen research that indicates it could be as high as 20,000 years. And Canada's been here for 150 years.
That's amazing. And when you talk about land theft, my understanding is that the Gitxsan never ceded any territory to Canada. There was never a treaty. It's basically unceded territory, and the Canadian courts have affirmed this. Isn't that the legal posture right now?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that's one thing that there is no argument on. Mm-hmm. everyone, whether it's the prosecution from the other side in Delaware or whatever, they're not standing there saying, no, you ceded the land. Well, that's over and done with it. Now, clearly, everyone understands that it is unceded.
So,
It's never been.
Given that it's unceded territory, you create a bizarre legal anomaly. Tell me if this is accurate. You were arrested for blocking rail tracks on your territory, and they charged you with trespassing and violating the law. Would you say that's an accurate characterization?
Yeah, for violating their law.
Right.
By our law, we were acting properly for what is happening on our territory.
And their law was simple court injunction saying you couldn't block the rail tracks on your own territory. Yeah. So when you block the rail tracks, like, oh, you're in violation of an injunction, we're going to arrest you. And that's their law, obviously. Yeah,
and it has happened in the past. And the unique thing here is every time it's happened, it has never gone into court. The title action is what would follow. That would be our defense for blocking. And they don't want it in court because the law, even their law, I think, is on your side on that issue. And I'll say this for those just joining, this is Stephen Donziger. You know, I'm in detention in New York right now on a Chevron prosecution. We have the honor of having Chief Spookw with the Gitxsan First Nation in British Columbia, Canada, with us tonight. I mean, what I kind of want to do is get the chief, you know, to tell his story to, you know, a U.S. audience. And, you know, it's an amazing story given that he was going to be the second person in history, as far as I could tell, me being the first to be potentially prosecuted directly by a private corporation when he challenged the gas industry pipeline crossing Gitxsan and Wet'suwet'en territory up in British Columbia. So, you know, I'm just blown away by the fact that a playbook started here in New York by Chevron to target the Indigenous peoples of Ecuador, and their lawyer was used by a judge in Vancouver, Canada, to target the Gitxsan. So we have something in common here. Obviously, I'm not an Indigenous person, but my role as a lawyer was to represent Indigenous peoples in Ecuador. You know, and this kind of stuff, attacking Indigenous leaders like you, arresting them, attacking earth defenders and lawyers who take on these difficult cases, to me, is something the public at large needs to become aware of. I mean, we cannot live in societies where private corporations get to lock people up, you know, as opposed to the government. I mean, that might be problematic too. But I mean, when a private corporation does it, that's just unbelievable. So tell a U.S. audience, what kind of support do you need personally and the Gitxsan need from outsiders at this point? I mean, I'm sure you probably need financial support. You probably need solidarity. Talk a little bit about your needs and maybe people can help. Well, we have a GoFundMe page running, and we do have some funds that we've gained through that. I'm expecting further litigation as we go forward with this. So the amount of money that we have now, we probably burn through that pretty quick with all the legal issues we'd be facing as we go.
How much money do you think you need to raise to cover your legal costs over the next year or two, realistically?
The minimum would be about 200,000.
200,000 Canadian dollars.
Yeah.
Okay. And how do you find your GoFundMe page? Is it up right now?
Yeah.
And I don't know if Kai, if you're there, if you could share the link to the GoFundMe page. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the Gitxsan Land Defenders.
Okay.
Facebook page. Yeah, it's the only one there if you're looking for that.
And it's spelled Gitxsan?
Yeah.
Okay. And how do you feel personally? Like, do you still feel, do you feel a little threatened? Do you feel empowered by this whole experience? I mean, you are getting some attention, and how do you feel? Can someone,
the whole idea of,
hold on. Oh, Kai, okay. If you could pin the GoFundMe page, that'd be great. Go ahead, Chief. I'm sorry.
the whole idea of getting arrested was to bring the title issue to the courts. It's a whole lot more expensive if you actually file a title action and go into court. The onus is on you to bring all of your evidence that way. But if we manage to get entities such as CN or CGL to come after us and try to prosecute us, and then our land defense is better and significantly less expensive. That was the idea here. But unfortunately, well, the idea was that I would get arrested, but we had 11 other Gitxsan and others that decided that they weren't going to leave me to stand by myself, and they all got arrested with me on that night. So that raised our costs quite a bit, but it certainly gave me a big lift for having them stand next to me.
Did you, when they arrested you, did you spend a night in jail, or did they release you immediately?
Well, after we were arrested, or as we were getting arrested, about over 400 Gitxsan and others from other nations gathered at an intersection just off of from where we were arrested on the tracks, and they blockaded the road, the highway, for 8 hours until we were released. Yeah, so the police were feeling the pressure because
where were you held those 8 hours? Like in a police van or something, or it was a pretty remote location, right?
No, they have a police station in town.
Okay.
Yeah, we were held. Yeah, but it took them quite a while to actually get us through the crowd because the crowd was large.
And I'm just curious, if those 400 people hadn't been there, do you think they would have released you so quickly?
No.
Because, you know, the lesson there is that kind of thing is so needed for this kind of work. And it's, you know, I've had lawyers represent me and say, you know, don't speak out and shut down your Twitter account and, you know, just lay low and the court will let you go, you know. And I just think, you know, that's not how it goes. So that's really great that you had all those supporters out there.
Oh, yeah, and the police didn't expect that at all. They had 50 people, 50 policemen come in. They had to bring in another 50 for another shift after.
And we say policemen, this is the Royal Canadian Mounted Police?
Yeah, but they drew policemen from all over the place. Terrace, Prince Rupert, Smithers, maybe even as far as Prince George. But a lot of the CGL, what do they call those? CGL policemen there? A commercial crime unit or whatever.
Okay, so various police forces. You know, I will say this, I'm going to just share this. When I heard about your story, I tweeted about it. And I called out the lawyer from Denton's law firm, I believe it was, who was working for the company that was going to prosecute you at the time. And like, I think the next day or the day after, they announced they were not going to prosecute you. And a bunch of people had retweeted me, including Susan Sarandon, the actor, and others. And I think that my experience is that these companies will do as much as they can as long as there's darkness, you know, as long as no one's watching and they feel like they're not going to pay a price. But once it becomes exposed, it becomes much more difficult. You know, apropos to the 400 people outside the police station, I'm asking people out there to follow this, and I'm going to tweet about it occasionally. And I think it's important that they feel that people around the world are watching this.
Oh yeah, it's big for us too, because clearly that was the result after your tweets, so that CNN decided to not pursue the charges. But and now it's been a little quiet as far as tweets are concerned. That they seem to have they're back to their oppressive nature, and they're trying to stretch it out, keep us before the courts, and raise our cost as much as possible.
That's awesome. So the issue of the land title, which is still sort of hanging out there, right? That hasn't been resolved because it hasn't really been litigated in Canadian courts, other than the case. It's a long, complicated name. Maybe you can enlighten us, but maybe you can explain that issue for an audience down here. Because in the United States, most Native groups have had treaties with the U.S. government, and there's reservations and kind of land titles that have really been distorted. There's been a massive amount of land theft, obviously, in this country from Indigenous peoples. Can you explain sort of how that's playing out in Canada and what the legal strategy is, if any, to protect your territory?
Well, that was the Delgamuukw-Gisdewe court case.
And that was in
It was filed for
1997?
Well, that was when the appeal came down.
Okay.
It went before the courts, and the first judge had ruled that he was saying that the rights and title had been extinguished. But they filed an appeal, and that result came down in 1997, and they acknowledged that the Gitxsan and Wet'suwet'en title still existed. Mm-hmm. Well, which is unique. Like when you think of it, okay, the title still exists. Well, if that's the case, and that says our sovereignty is still there, how can Canada's or British Columbia's sovereignty exist in the same land? Because since then we've gone through this process of where the courts are trying to tell us how things should be on our lands. So they're still acting as if that case didn't happen. It's still going forward, like there are title actions going on now, where they're going into court and putting their case to the province or Canada and saying, we have title here. Well, clearly, through the Delgamuukw-Gisdewe court case, they've already acknowledged that title exists. And for sure, like for anybody with any kind of property, when you have title to that land, you acknowledge it, it's yours. It's not something that someone's coming in and sharing with you. So all this talk from Canada and British Columbia about reconciling their title with our title is nonsense, because our title is the only title that applies to this land. There's no way that their title should apply at all. And there's no way that their courts should be coming to us and dictating to us how any title action should be going forward. Clearly, recognizing
it's amazing
there's title there.
Yeah, they just do it anyway.
Oh, yeah,
right? Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Well, when you look at the injunctions that are being put in place now, a lower court, where in our case, when we blockaded CN, a lower court issued an injunction with the CGL pipeline going through the Wet'suwet'en territory. A lesser court issued an injunction there. So they're completely ignoring the injunction or completely ignoring the decision of the Delgamuukw-Gisdewe court case, where they acknowledge our title exists. And they're going into the lower court to issue injunctions when they're issuing those injunctions, they're saying that title doesn't exist. Now, I've had conversations with people working for the forestry and working for the provincial government, where they're telling me, no, your title, that doesn't mean anything until you take it into court and you pass it through our courts. Well, that's utter nonsense. They've already acknowledged that title exists in 1997. So that should not be an issue. Right now, all we should be looking at is implementing that decision from 1997.
When the lower courts issue these injunctions, are they ex parte, or is your side represented?
No, ex parte.
That's unbelievable.
Now, yeah, well, with the funding that we have in place,
Mm-hmm.
We've got lawyers ready for whatever. So any issues like this come up in the future, we'll have lawyers ready to go and butt heads with their lawyers.
For the non-lawyers among us, ex parte means that the railway company went in and got an injunction and didn't tell the chief or his people, and they weren't even represented in court when that injunction was issued. And then the company takes the injunction, which says you can't be on our tracks. In other words, you can't protest. and they give it to the police, and they have a piece of paper, and they're like, oh, you're on the tracks, you're violating this court order, which was issued by a judge who ignored their title and who had a hearing without them being present, right?
Yeah. Yeah, but I should say that we were asserting our ownership and our title to the land.
Right.
We're not protesting.
Okay, that's an important point. I apologize. Yes, that's a very important point. Thank you. You know, even those of us who do this fall back into these frameworks that are not appropriate. I know you have Kai Nagata with you. Kai, I don't know if you can squeeze in next to the chief and get on camera, but Kai is someone I met through the chief, who has worked with the Gitxsan on all these issues for a number of years. He lives up there. Kai, what can you add to this conversation? I mean, what help us out here? I mean, what's your sense of things at this point?
Well, first of all, Stephen, I really appreciate you shining a spotlight on this, because I think Canada, if they do one thing well, it's branding, right? Most people in the States probably think of this as a liberal paradise where all the problems are solved, and instead we've got our federal government flagrantly violating their own Supreme Court decisions and trying to criminalize people like Spookw and his fellow chiefs for simply standing on their own land. One thing I wanted to mention is that the largest shareholder in CN Rail is Bill Gates, right? So this is an American billionaire weaponizing Canada's broken court system to try to put Indigenous people in jail for standing on their own territory. And I think that there's some serious answers that investors like Mr. Gates should give when they claim to be in favor of Indigenous rights, and they claim to be in favor of ethical sourcing of materials, right, for computer parts and that kind of thing. And then they turn around and use these what we call the legal billy club to try to clear Indigenous people out of the way for asserting their title and rights. So yeah, this is an issue that is close to home, I think, for people right across North America. And I really appreciate you using your profile and linking that, recognizing the overlap with your own case, because this is a really slippery slope.
My honor in doing so. Are you guys trying to pressure Bill Gates directly?
It's in the back pocket. It's something that we haven't had to do yet, but yeah, I mean, it's definitely a tactic that we'd be open to if we could get some help from friends in the States, because yeah, ultimately, you know, he's going to have to pick a lane. If he's in favor of climate action and Indigenous rights, then he can't be allowing a company like CN Rail to use the Canadian courts to go after a chief like Spookw.
Just to be clear, so people understand, CN Rail is the private railway company that has tracks running across the Gitxsan territory that were based on nothing but raw, really illegally exercised power. They were never given permission by the hereditary chiefs, who were the legitimate leadership of the Gitxsan, to build those tracks.
Yeah, no, they just went ahead with it. There was no consultation, nothing, no transaction, nothing.
How long have those tracks been in your territory? How many years?
110 years, at least. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a lot of background. And when CN went to court, they said that they were losing, what, $130 million a day?
$135 million a day.
Right.
So that tells you
wait a second. By virtue of your people blocking traffic on their rail line, they were losing $130 million a day, they claimed?
Well, they said it was revenue, but they kind of implied they were losing $135 million a day.
Anyway, that just gives you a sense of the volume of raw materials that are moving across Gitxsan territory every day, right? The coal, the wood pellets, entire trees raised and turned into pellets to power the electricity industry overseas in Japan and England. All of that goes past our communities every single day. And so they haven't paid a cent to the people whose land they're crossing, right? They have not paid. Ordinarily, you'd pay a toll, right? You would, if you're moving goods on a pipeline or on a highway,
right,
you would pay a toll to the owners of the land you're crossing, and they've never ever paid a penny to the Gitxsan, and that is a historic injustice. And the bill just keeps mounting every year that they leave this issue unresolved.
That's unbelievable. Explain real quick so people understand what your neighbors, the Wet'suwet'en, are facing with the pipeline and why you're in solidarity with them. Like, explain this pipeline and that we're really in a critical stage now, as I understand it, with the weather warming up. They're going to try to drill under the river, and help people understand what this pipeline, if it actually succeeds in getting built, will do to undermine centuries of life up in that region.
So the province that we call British Columbia is home to one of the largest deposits of natural gas in the world. And we have a government that's very pro-fracking and subsidizes the fracking industry to the tune of over $1.5 billion every year. You have these major state-owned oil companies in Asia. So the state-owned company of Malaysia, Petronas, you have Royal Dutch Shell, PetroChina, and they spotted basically an arbitrage opportunity. They saw gas that was landlocked and cheap in northeastern BC, and they've got a market in Asia around the Pacific Rim that's willing to pay quite a bit for LNG. And so basically they figured, okay, if we can buy up licenses to those gas reserves and get a pipeline built to the coast, then we can make money on the price differential. And so, you know, this company, or the project, is called LNG Canada, but there isn't a single Canadian company involved. It's all state-owned oil companies from Asia backed by Royal Dutch Shell. And so they've got a pipeline project called Coastal GasLink, which would cross the entire province, across hundreds of streams and rivers, through all this sensitive riparian habitat, and it would fill up these tankers in Kitimat, which is a fjord on the coast where they would hope to ship that gas to Asia. Never mind the climate crisis, never mind the people whose land they're crossing. And so the Wet'suwet'en are the ones who've really taken the firmest stand in terms of just saying, you know, no consent, no pipeline. And that's where the RCMP got involved, and that's where you saw the raids over the last couple of years with militarized police officers jumping out of helicopters and snowshoeing in to arrest unarmed people at gunpoint. And it was in reaction to that that the Gitxsan, who are next door neighbors, stood in solidarity with the Wet'suwet'en and risked arrest a couple of years ago.
So unbelievable courage, by the way. I mean, I've seen some of those pictures. Who do these state-owned Asian gas companies pay for the right to build this pipeline across First Nations territory? I mean, do they pay the Canadian government? Do they pay does British Columbia sort of act like they can license the right to do this? I know they also probably pay some of the elected band leaders. I mean, explain how they think they can do this.
Well, that's done through the provincial government. They're acting as if they own the land.
Okay, so the provincial government, you mean the British province of British Columbia?
Yeah, province of British Columbia.
And they probably have some energy ministry at the provincial level, and they're the ones who negotiate these deals and take, I guess, licensing fees?
Yeah, they would take royalties or whatever.
And how,
Yeah,
I mean,
just
this is
a fun little.
obviously they have no right to do this, but how much money are they taking?
Well, in terms of royalties, like, we collect less on gas royalties than we do from tobacco taxes, right? So we get more money from casinos and cigarettes in this province than we do from this massive reserve of natural gas. And we subsidize the industry, as I said earlier, to the tune of $1.5 billion every year. So we get actually a fraction of the revenue compared to what taxpayers here are giving out in terms of incentives and tax credits to these international companies. So it's lose-lose. You know, whether or not you're Indigenous, you're getting screwed by this. You know, it's Wet'suwet'en land and Gitxsan land that's in jeopardy. But the entire provincial treasury and all of the citizens of British Columbia are underwriting this industry with our tax dollars. And then we have to pay for the cleanup, right? So the liability all lands again on the province of BC and on the taxpayers of BC for these massive fracking ponds and for all the contamination of all the water, and of course the healthcare costs that are associated with fracking in these communities, and what it does to the water and the elevated risks of cancer. And it's a total ecological nightmare. And all of that, of course, all that liability lands back on the public. So the true subsidy is into the billions and billions.
That's exactly how it went down in Ecuador with Chevron. Unbelievable. You know, they basically drill, they dump all that billions of gallons of toxic waste onto these vulnerable communities, poison the land, take all the profits, flee the country, and leave the bill for the public. I mean, they're massively subsidized, these companies, when they pollute like this. What do you think the chances are of the showdown to stop further construction of this pipeline. How do you see that playing out over the next few weeks and months?
Well, right now, the greatest vulnerability of this project is financial. Not just because of the resistance on the ground, but because of their own mismanagement and their lack of understanding of the geography and the weather up here. They are years behind schedule, and they're billions of dollars over budget. And so right now, there's a really ugly fight developing between the Canadian pipeline company. I mean, they're Canadian in name only. Their headquarters are in Calgary, and all the contractors are from France and Spain and all over the world. But the pipeline company that was supposed to deliver this Coastal GasLink pipeline is behind schedule. And these state-owned Asian oil companies, they don't mess around. They're used to having their pipelines delivered on time and on budget. And so they don't like the fact that this company in Calgary is trying to shake them down for extra money to finish the project. So there's a really ugly battle happening between these two sets of sort of corporate boardrooms in Kuala Lumpur and in Calgary, Canada, over who is going to pick up the bill for this additional cost. And so the more delay there is, the more resistance there is on the ground, obviously the higher those costs go, and the more of a wedge we can drive between the pipeline company and their investors. But I would say at a deeper level, the people of Canada, the people of British Columbia need to stop subsidizing this industry, because the whole thing collapses if it isn't propped up with our tax dollars, and if it isn't being actively facilitated by our government, which at the same time talks a good game on Indigenous rights and climate, but is really, when you look at their priorities and where they put their money, they are doing everything they can to facilitate the expansion of fracked gas infrastructure and tar sands pipelines. And so I think Canadians and Americans, where you can stand in solidarity with us, need to take responsibility for this, because all of this is being done in our name. All of these violations of Indigenous rights are being done to supposedly benefit the people of Canada, the settlers who've occupied this land for the last 150 years. And I think it's time to just say that's enough.
What do they say that if the people of Canada are subsidizing this dirty industry, what do they claim the benefits are? That it creates jobs, the construction jobs for the pipeline? Is that the benefit? These temporary jobs?
Exactly.
I mean, it's just what a lose-lose proposition. I will say this. I think in terms of what we can do, what I'm going to do is on my Instagram account, sometime in the next day or two, I'm going to put a place where people can contact Bill Gates. Let's start that rolling. And I think Bill Gates, just to be clear, is a major shareholder in CN Rail, which is the rail company that had the injunction that ended up with the arrest of Hereditary Chief Spookw and his colleagues. And what do you want people to say to Bill Gates if they can contact him or write him? Divest?
Oh,
I mean, divest?
yeah, divest.
To stop CN Rail from doing what? X, Y, and Z. What do you want Bill Gates to do?
Well, there's a massive reckoning coming,
Hey,
right?
Ty,
There's a massive.
Can you move a little bit to your left so we can get you in the frame? Yeah, thank you.
I'm just saying, as an investor, he should recognize that there's a massive unpaid bill, right? And whether it happens next year or 10 years from now, CN Rail is going to be on the hook for hundreds of years of back rent. And if you're a major shareholder in this private railway company, that is an anvil hanging over your head. The same as with the investors in all of these pipelines and gas projects. So that would be my message. I don't know. Maybe.
Oh yeah, no, that's perfect. Yeah, at some point they have to pay. They're transporting all these dangerous goods across our territories. They go right through the community of New Hazelton. I've got Chief Spookw who lives just a stone throw away from where the train tracks go. So I've got great concerns that they have an accident on that railway that causes great harm. They've had trains blow up in Quebec that blew up a complete community. The CN workers, the engineers who are driving these trains, refer to these trains as bomb trains. They're transporting fuel and all of these other products.
I bet if you did a forensic accounting, maybe you have, of all the value of the goods that have been transported through your territory since those tracks were built, they would owe you tens of billions of dollars.
Oh yeah, I have a number in mind. That would be significant when we get to that.
I didn't mean to get ahead of us here, but I mean, and I know ultimately it's not about the money, it's about the justice. You know, it's about recognizing that they can't do this. They can't just use your land for their profit without recognizing your right to it and paying tolls on it. I mean, my guess is you wouldn't even want the tracks there if you could go back in time, but they are using, they owe you money. They owe your people money.
Well, yeah, for sure they owe money, but yeah, you're absolutely right with about when you talked about moving the tracks. I would like them actually moved out of New Hazelton or closer to the mountain, so that the risk is less. That would be a big expense for CN, but safety of the people is priority.
How many Gitxsan live on the traditional territory that's been unceded? How many people?
The actual people living in the territory could be in the range of 6,000. There are a number of people that are living in different communities throughout the province and throughout the world. But we follow our mothers for our birthright in to be Gitxsan. So if one of our people is born to a Gitxsan mother, then they're automatically Gitxsan. If they live off the nation's lands, they're still Gitxsan, and they would return home for this or that. They still have a place within the houses of the Gitxsan.
Wow. Okay, so there's Bill Gates, there's the GoFundMe page. Is there anything else you would want people to do at this stage to support other than just monitor and raise hell if they try to prosecute you?
Yeah, well, it is certainly still possible that the actual judge, well, I'm not so sure how much I would trust the word of CN when even in a letter when they're saying that they were not going to pursue charges. They've been stretching this out for so long that who's to say at the end they may come forward and say, okay, no, we've decided to go ahead and pursue the private prosecution.
Yeah.
And civil contempt. And there again, the judge, Justice Branch, he's been a big push on the private prosecution.
I need to be careful what I say here, but it's worth mentioning that the judge, in this case, worked for a firm that cut its teeth fighting the Gitxsan and the Wet'suwet'en on the Delgamuukw-Gisdewe title case. And so it's a very small world. I'm not accusing him directly of conflict of interest, but when you look at the people who are appointed to the BC Supreme Court, it's just a small world, right? There's only so many corporate law firms in downtown Vancouver, and all their clients are these major resource companies like CN Rail,
yeah,
or like the pipeline company. And so, yeah, that
and
firm.
The judges, I bet most of the judges come out of those big corporate firms that represent the fossil fuel companies, right?
Exactly, exactly. It's a very small and incestuous world. And the government is a major client as well, right? Because the government has been facing litigation. Indigenous people weren't allowed to hire lawyers until, what, the 60s?
Yeah.
So ever since then, and the Calder case here in British Columbia, you know, Indigenous people have been whooping British Columbia's ass in court. And so the government faces massive liabilities every year. Right now they're fighting a new title case down on Vancouver Island by the Nuchatlat, and they have to retain these lawyers for years in order to fight Indigenous people and try to delay their claims of title. And so again, most of the judges in this province are coming out of either, you know, they call them Indian fighters in the BC government. They're either Indian fighters from these big corporate law firms, or they're oil and gas lawyers who've been working for the big resource companies. And so, yeah, the system is pretty rigged if you're a land defender or a water protector who's trying to stand up for your own rights, and you're going up against, yeah, judges and prosecutors who have cut their teeth denying Indigenous rights for their entire career.
Which is why I'd say it's so important to keep the, you know, the citizen mobilization. You know, it's the only way to do it, because, you know, I will say, what's the judge's name who authorized this unprecedented private prosecution of Chief Spookw? It's Justice Branch.
Branch, yeah.
Okay, and he's on what? I know he's in Vancouver. What court is he on?
Well, it's the BC Supreme Court.
Okay, the BC Supreme Court, which is the trial level court, I presume. Justice Branch worked for, just to be clear, Justice Branch worked for a big law firm that used to represent fossil fuel companies that were fighting the Gitxsan before he became a judge. And he's the one who issued the indictment that led to the arrest of the hereditary chief of the Gitxsan, Chief Spookw, who's here with us tonight. I mean, that sounds to me like a conflict of interest. I mean, call it what you want, but that just seems really unfair. I assume there's no Native, Indigenous lawyers on the bench in that court? Were they all basically conquering culture judges?
There are no Indigenous judges that we'd be going before. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if you conflicted out this judge, sad to say you'd have to do that to most of the judges in British Columbia, right? This is a colonial resource colony. This is a frontier town, right? And the cops rent trucks from Frontier Chrysler, and they sit around idling, surveilling land defenders in trucks with Frontier written on the bumper. That is the mentality. That is where the companies get this attitude that they can just roll over anybody who gets in the way.
They have the state power behind them, and that's what Chevron did here in New York. When they lost in Ecuador, they came into the courts here and did the same thing. So the combination of the fossil fuel money and government alliance is very tough to deal with. But I will say, and I think we're running out of time here, but I just want to say, first of all, I salute you, Chief Spookw, and your people. Kai, thank you for your explanations. They're awesome. As I see it, what y'all have done so far is so raise the cost of the pipeline, along with many other people, the Wet'suwet'en, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. Is it Wet'suwet'en? Okay. That they're way behind schedule. The project isn't nearly as profitable as they thought it would be. And it's unclear if they'll even finish the pipeline. And that's all because of on-the-ground resistance by these First Nations and their supporters, many of whom have been arrested and paid pretty heavy costs, but with the net result that you've added billions of dollars to the tab of these Asian gas companies, and that's nothing to scoff at. That's pretty impressive. And I think it's important as we look at these issues to celebrate achievements. And I see that as a great achievement. I see the fact that CN Rail, at least publicly, has said they won't prosecute you, even though they have the legal authority to do so, as a great achievement. And that's all because of the resistance and the principled resistance, Chief, of you under your leadership and others. So I salute you. And I think we need to understand that, we can keep going. You can keep building international support and potentially stop this pipeline, as well as resolve these title issues such that that Supreme Court decision gets actually implemented.
Well, we're still facing the possible risk that the CN will decide to go forward with a civil action that they filed, and that's the civil action where they were claiming $135 million in losses per day.
So they would sue you and the entire.
Well, in order to get the injunction, they filed in court with a civil action. That's how they got.
But the civil action was for monetary damages.
Yes.
And that.
So
how
that's
much
still
claim that they said the damages were 130 million a day. So they're
135 million a day. We had them blockaded for some 6 days.
And what's the status of the civil action? It's still open.
Well, we're through the whole process of trying to have communication with CN just to have the other two charges vacated. We've actually had discussions with them very rarely, but part of that whole process is waiting for them to get word from their client as to what they will do with the civil action. Because the prior lawyer, the one you had called out earlier, Sarah Nelligan, she had threatened that she would list all 12 of us on that civil suit, because there was just John Doe and Jane Doe on that suit, but she threatened it, and that's what we're in discussions with CN now about. So before we wind up in court on April 27th, they should have some kind of a decision on whether they will go forward with that or not.
And April 27th is the next scheduled court date.
Yeah.
So you'll
There
know
was
by then latest whether they're going to go forward with the civil case.
Well, they had promised to get back to us last Friday, but that day went by, and they said, "Oh, we'll have to get back to you on another day." The same thing they've been doing all the way along.
Well, fascinating.
But that civil action, if they bring that against us, they will have to reveal all of the product that they're transporting on the rail.
And they know that's what you're thinking, so they know there's massive risk in pursuing that. It's know what it is.
But that also opens the door for Dogmouth too.
Yeah.
That's what we've been counting on. That's the title case. So we go forward. If CN brings a civil action against us, we'll gladly go into that, and that'll bring up the title case. We'll countersue for the trespass and lack of payment for the use of the land for 110 years.
And so you'd have a counterclaim against them far higher than their $130 million a day for 6 days.
Well, I like the idea of their $135 million a day. Yeah, we can work with that.
Yeah. I like the way you think. It's strategic and powerful. Anything else?
You want a case for $9 billion. We got to get us close to there so we're in the same league there soon.
It took a lot of work, I will say our was affirmed by 2 different Supreme Courts, 28 appellate judges, and they've still manipulated the system, so they haven't paid the first dollar yet, although I hope and expect they will pay. But you guys are awesome, and I'm so proud to see what you're doing. And I'm glad we have this conversation because we're going to watch this closely and be in touch. And I'll, through my Twitter feed and my Instagram feed, I'll do my best to keep people informed. And, you know, let's come back and do another one of these in a couple of weeks or a month when there's something more to talk about. But, you know, we can keep building support for you, I hope, down here in the United States and elsewhere around the world.
Excellent. Thank you, Steve.
Thanks so much.
Okay, and by the way, everybody, we're going to repost this on Instagram and some other platforms. We're sort of just starting to do this IG live stuff. We don't know exactly what we're doing yet, but we're going to do our best to push this around as far and wide as we can. Everybody have a good night, and thanks so much for joining us. Chief Spookw, deep respect to you. Kai Nagata, deep respect to you. Keep up the great work. We'll keep in touch.
Thanks so much.
Okay, take care.
Thank you.
Good night.